As I have promised, I want to introduce you to another thought leader in the field of leadership education. This presentation will dive deeply into the work of Michael Fullan. He is one of the world's leading experts in educational reform. Michael Fullan is a professor emeritus of the Ontario Institute for Studies in the Education at the University of Toronto. He's currently engaged in advising policymakers and local leaders around the world on how to help all children receive an education. His mission is to foster deep learning so that all learners contribute to the common good, address global challenges, and flourish in a complex world. Michael posits that without change, there cannot be growth, and therefore effective leaders must be willing and able to react to new trends, developments, and attitudes if their institutions are to thrive. In addition, he believes that the more complex the change, the more people must be part of the solution, and the more sophisticated the leadership must become. Fullan's second edition of Leading in a Culture of Change is about how leaders can focus on certain key change themes that will allow them to lead effectively under the current messy conditions. It's also about how leaders can and should foster leadership in others, and how we can produce more leaders of leaders. Fullan suggests that moral purpose, however, is the rock upon which all effective leadership is built. If you were to ask people in your school to brainstorm the words to describe change, it's likely they would come up with a mixture of both negative and positive words. On the negative side, they might list things like fear, anxiety, loss, danger, panic, perhaps even disaster. On the brighter side, though, you might hear words like exhilarating, risk-taking, exciting, improvements, energizing. The bottom line is that change arouses emotions, and when emotions intensify, leadership is the key. Changing the culture is one of the hardest tasks that humankind deals with, and on a basic level, on an evolutionary level, if we don't change and adapt, we become obsolete or extinct. As we will delve into, taking charge in an ever-changing environment can be daunting. However, Michael Fullan breaks down change leadership into 5 essential components, and he defines the core competencies of leading in a culture of change. Just as a brief overview, we're going to go much more deeply into each of these, but he lists moral purpose. Fullan believes that moral purpose remains the rock, and his theories delve into the actual impact of moral purpose. Understanding change. He posits that change is laced with nuance, and effective change and nuance have to go hand in hand. He also talks about building relationships as a key ingredient, and talks about how we need to be aware of effective and not so effective relationships and examine this through the idea or the lens of effective collaboration. He talks about creating and sharing knowledge, but he examines knowledge in relationship to deep learning. And in terms of coherence, he presents it as a powerful concept that pulls it all together and focuses on the importance of leaders as coherence makers in these very complex times. In previous presentations and discussion forums, we have examined the differences between management and leadership. And by now you may agree that they do in fact overlap, and perhaps even that we need both to effectively lead in today's schools. But it may be important to think about and highlight one significant difference. Leadership is needed for complex problems that do not have easy answers. And often we place leaders in an untenable position when we expect them to provide solutions. Ronald Heifetz suggests that in a crisis, we call for someone with answers, decisions, strength, and a map of the future. Someone who knows where we ought to be going. In short, someone who can make the hard problems simple. However, he continues and says, instead of looking for saviors, we should be calling for leadership that will challenge us to face problems for which there are no simple, painless solutions, problems that require us to learn in new ways. There's no doubt it's very hard to be a good leader, not because they are deficient, but it is hard. It's hard work. One of the biggest culprits with leaders who do not have a positive impact is perhaps overconfidence. In fact, research suggests that the most competent leaders exhibit very much self-criticism and self-doubt. Chamorro and Premuzic suggest that expertise increases self-knowledge, which includes the self-awareness of one's limitations. This illustration shows us again the 5 core competencies that Fullen's model is based on. If you notice, these 5 capacities can actually operate together in a checks and balances fashion. Leaders with deep moral purpose provide guidance, but they can also have blinders if they're not challenged through the dynamics of change and the give and take of relationships and with ideas that are generated by new knowledge. Similarly, coherence is part and parcel of all of this complexity and can really never be achieved since newcomers come and go, new challenges appear, things are changing on a daily, if not hourly basis. Leaders in a culture of change value and see as valuable the tensions inherent in trying to address hard problems, possibly because that's where the greatest accomplishments can lie. Leaders who are steeped in these 5 core capacities tend to generate long-term commitments in those with whom they work. Effective leaders who live and breathe these 5 core aspects are committed to stay the course and are successful in mobilizing more people to join in their task of tackling challenging problems. A word of caution is needed here. Leaders can be powerful, and so can groups of leaders, but that also means there is the potential to be powerfully wrong. That is why the 5 core capacities need to work together in a system of checks and balances. Good leaders foster good leadership at other levels and assist in producing a steady stream of future leaders. Ineffective leaders do the opposite and actually can make matters worse in a quick downward spiral. As humans, we face one huge obstacle that other living beings do not face: learning anxiety, particularly in relation to something new. In his 2010 book, Edgar Schein identified 5 possible or probable learning anxieties that we may come up against in the face of change. He talked about the fear of loss of power or position, the fear of temporary or even worse, incompetence, fear of punishment for incompetence, fear of loss of personal identity, and fear of loss of group membership. Often, when faced with change, the odds favor the status quo. Leading in a culture of change, however, is for those who want to beat those odds. It is not that these leaders are fearless, but they see these anxieties as a normal part of significant change. Effective leaders continually work on the 5 core components of leadership if they pursue a moral purpose, understand the change process, develop grounded collaborations, foster deep knowledge building, and strive for coherence. And all of that with energy, courage, relentlessness, along with a healthy share of doubt and anxiety. Michael Fullen suggests that moral purpose is about both ends and means. In education, we know that a very important end, the most important end, is to make a positive difference in the lives of students. But the means of getting to that end are equally important. If a leader does not treat those in his or her care fairly, then you have a leader without followers. To strive to improve the quality of how we live together is the moral purpose of the highest order. Sergio Vani, in fact, drew a similar conclusion in his 1999 book, The Life World of Leadership. His exact words are, ask the next 5 people you meet to list 3 persons they know, either personally or from history, who they consider to be authentic leaders. Then have them describe these leaders. Chances are your respondents will mention things like integrity, reliability, moral excellence, sense of purpose, firmness of conviction, steadiness, and unique qualities of style and substance that differentiate the leaders they chose from others. Key in this list of characteristics is the importance of substance, distinctive qualities, and moral underpinnings. Authentic leaders anchor their practice in ideas and values and commitments. They exhibit distinctive qualities of style and substance, and they can be trusted to be morally diligent in advancing the enterprises they lead. Authentic leaders, in other words, display character. And character is the defining characteristic of authentic leadership. Interesting that Sergio Vani is on that same wavelength. There's also an interesting evolutionary hypothesis that cooperative groups thrive and selfish ones do not. So cooperative societies have survived at the expense of others. LRN is a research group that tracks the state of moral leadership in business. They define moral leadership as how leaders touch hearts, not just minds, how they enlist others in shared and significant endeavors to create conditions where everyone can contribute their fullest talent and realize their deepest humanity. On this slide, you see a summary of their most recent main findings. Notice that 87% of those who responded stated the need for moral leadership is greater now than ever. This same survey found that 90% of the people who worked for moral leaders say they feel seen, heard, and respected. 89% of those who work for moral leaders said they feel like they matter. And 95% of those who work for moral leaders say they are inspired to contribute their best efforts. However, overall, only 7% of the respondents said that their managers exhibit the behaviors of moral leadership. And of that group, 59% stated that their managers exhibit few or none of the behaviors of moral leadership. The bottom line is that this study found out that moral leadership is consistently good for business and that it is in very short supply. Only 14% of leaders consistently demonstrate most of the moral leadership behaviors. Now, Michael Fullan states that in education, one would think that moral purpose would fare better than in the business world. After all, education of our youth is a moral undertaking, and that is our mission. But if we apply the criteria of moral purpose accomplished, the majority of students do well in education. That's what we want. Education does seem to fall short. It's admittedly challenging to serve all students, absolutely. But the majority of school districts have a moral purpose in their vision statements and in their strategic plans. But the track record of follow-through is wanting. Fullan posits that the main moral education issue today is the inequity of student achievement. He tells us that to make your moral purpose prominent, we have to connect it to the other 4 core capacities. Fullan believes that the culture of change needs to be something more than, say, Gandhi's "be the change you want to see in the world." He actually suggests that leading in a culture of change involves creating with others the change you didn't even know you wanted. He also talks about understanding change and says it really means understanding people, not people in general, but people in specific, the ones you are leading. One of his contemporaries, Henry Mitzenberg, stated that leadership is about energizing other people to make good decisions and do better things. He also talks about effective leadership and says it inspires more than it empowers, it connects more than it controls, it demonstrates more than it decides, and again, all of it by engaging others. So in summary, perhaps change is about interactions with people. As a leader, you can have good ideas, but it's important to process them and get other ideas from those you work with, especially those ones that you want to change. We do know that the more complex the change, the more people must be a part of the solution. So then, according to Fullan, the plan is we need to become change savvy. And he suggests 9 specific strategies that should be in concert, not alone, in concert. His number 1 recommendation is to be right at the end of the meeting, not at the beginning. Basically, here he's talking about the fact that it is a leader's job to flesh out all the facts and opinions. As a leader, you will be measured on whether or not you made good decisions, not whether or not it was your idea in the beginning. The more complex the problem, the more people with the problem must be involved in solving the problem. In fact, in many situations, it is the people with the problem who will have some of the best insights. Second, the emphasis on relationships is number 1. Often when a newly appointed leader comes in, they have to be coming in with a mandate to bring about change. There's a dilemma to consider here, though. If a new leader comes on too strong, the culture will rebel. On the other hand, if a new leader is overly respectful of the existing culture, he or she is in danger of being sucked into the status quo. So for change-savvy leaders, it's important to carefully enter into new settings, to listen and learn from those who've been there longer, engage in fact-finding and joint problem-solving, be very careful as you diagnose the situation, address people's concerns forthrightly, be enthusiastic, genuine, and sincere about the changed circumstances, work towards driving buy-in, and develop a credible plan. Thirdly, in this change process, it's important to acknowledge the implementation dip. It's important to understand that when you introduce something new, the first few months can be very bumpy. New skills and understanding require a learning curve. Your job as a leader will be to help the organization get through to the point where the benefits start to accrue, but you will need to be patient. The development of individual and collective capacity takes time and sustained effort. So maybe it's better to think of it as an implementation development rather than a dip. Fullen also suggests that you accelerate as you go. He posits that getting into action sooner rather than later is key. The early stages of a rapidly improving enterprise can be challenging and exciting because you are working with others to do something important. So there are 3 insights or mantras might be: go slow in order to go fast, use the group to change the group, and talk the walk. He also cautions us to be aware of fat plans. Leaders in general have a tendency to way overplan on paper. And the caution here is that too many ideas can lead to change fatigue. Elaborate written plans do not guarantee the quality of the action. A system of interaction that's built on focused goals and brief documents can lead to better success. The idea here is to make the plans a living document. For the 6th point, he talks about behavior before beliefs. Here he says that if you want to kill a good idea, just mandate it. The idea here is to expose people to a good idea. Use the group to change the group, and be sure that you participate as a learner. Effective change moves more smoothly when leaders provide new experiences in a non-threatening circumstance, and then provide the opportunity for discussion and reflection. Number 7 talks about communication, and absolutely during implementation, communication is paramount. Leading in a culture of change is about ongoing, daily focused communication while doing the work. In other words, don't talk about it too long before you move ahead. And once you start a change, communicate frequently from day one. Communication during implementation gives you the opportunity to learn how it's going, and you can identify problems early and address them readily. Excitement prior to implementation is very fragile. It's important to realize that genuine excitement comes from accomplishing something, not imagining it. Knowledgeable leaders strive for small early successes, they acknowledge real problems, they admit mistakes, they protect their people, and they celebrate along the way. Really good, effective leaders even see setbacks as simply just another problem to be solved. And it gives everyone a greater sense of fulfillment when they've all been addressed. The last one is a very key piece: becoming the lead learner. Leading change is ultimately about helping others to focus and learn. Becoming a lead learner is the overarching theme of this whole idea of leading in a culture of change. Fullen suggests that there are 6 aspects that leaders need to remember. You need to participate as a learner. You need to listen, learn, and lead in that order. Listen first, learn next, and then lead. He talks about the importance of being both an expert and an apprentice in the situation. You need to be able to develop others to the point that you become dispensable. It also is important to be persistent and courageous. And it's important to focus on how as well as the what of the change. Something to think about is that we are more likely to learn something from people who disagree with us than we are from people who agree. The human tendency, however, is to hang and listen to those who agree with us most. In this situation, when we're talking about change, resistors are crucial, particularly when it comes to the politics of implementation. Respecting resistance is essential. If you ignore it, it will eventually take its toll. So savvy learning organizations and savvy leaders don't only go with the like-minded. In fact, they deliberately build in differences. They don't mind so much when others disturb the equilibrium. They trust the learning process. They keep a focus on moral purpose. They pay attention to the change process and those nuances. They build relationships, share deep knowledge, and think critically. And they balance themselves on the edge of chaos while they're seeking coherence. If you ask people in successful schools what they think is the reason for success, the answer is quite often, it's the people. But perhaps that's only partially true. Michael Fullen and a plethora of other thought leaders believe it's actually the relationships between those people that make the difference. For instance, in their 2000 publication, Lewin and Regine state that genuine relationships are based on authenticity and care. They emphasize the need to pay as much attention to how we treat people as we do structures, data, and strategies. There's a big difference between professional collaboration and collaborative professionalism. Professional collaboration merely refers to a group of professionals getting together to do something. Collaborative professionalism, on the other hand, involves the joint work of educators embedded in the culture and life of the school, educators who care for each other as fellow professionals as they pursue their challenging work, and educators who collaborate in ways that are responsive to and inclusive of the culture of the students, themselves, the community, and society in general. The difference lies in the purpose and nature of the collaboration. It's all about the culture and the relationships and the collaboration that's working together to improve and deliver for the students. Again, culture's at the core. Effective relationships, however, have a strong emotional component. It's important to support each other when times are tough or individuals are down. They also have a getting better at our daily work dimension, where people are striving for good consistency around what works and seeking innovations to make performance more effective. In essence, relationships are central to success and change, but they must develop towards greater mutual commitment, and it has to be related to the goals. From a change perspective, relationships often come with a side benefit. In good collaborative work, you generally don't even have to impose ideas because they're built into the culture. To be successful beyond the short run, schools and districts need to incorporate moral purpose, respect, build and draw on human relationships, and foster purposeful collaboration both inside and outside the organization. Fullen believes firmly that getting collaboration right is central to the culture of change. In their 2000 publication, Brown and Duguid established a foundation for viewing knowledge as a social phenomenon. They explain that emphasizing information and providing more and more access to information simply leads to an information glut. In fact, sending individuals or even teams to trainings by itself does not work. Leading in a culture of change does not mean placing those changed people back into unchanged environments. Effective change leaders work on changing the context. They strive to build a new environment that's conducive to learning, sharing learning, and information only becomes valuable in that social context. For example, think of how often we hear that a presenter is going to share best practices with us, and they generally go about identifying those best practices fairly well. But challenges arise when it comes to transferring and using that knowledge back in the school or classroom. Brown and Duguid really believe that information becomes knowledge only when it takes on a social life. They caution us that knowledge lies less in databases and more in people. They tell us that it's people that ultimately decide what information means, and that knowledge is something we digest, not merely hold on to. And knowledge entails the knower's understanding and some degree of commitment. Even in business, leaders there make crucial distinctions between explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge. Explicit knowledge generally refers to the words and numbers that can be communicated in data or information. Tacit knowledge, on the other hand, refers to skills, beliefs, and understandings that lie below the surface. They're not easily visible or even expressible. Tacit knowledge is highly personalized and would include things like subjective insights, intuitions. Even hunches would fall into this category. In their 1995 publication, Nonaka and Takuchi note that the sharing of tacit knowledge among multiple individuals with different backgrounds, perspectives, and motivations becomes a critical step for organization knowledge creation to take place. Individuals' emotions, feelings, and mental models have to be shared to build mutual trust. Knowledge, then, they suggest, is distinct from information, and it's closely attached to human emotions, aspirations, hopes, and intentions. Effective leaders, whether they're in business or in education, understand that the value and the role of knowledge creation. In fact, they make it a priority and establish and enforce the habit of knowledge exchange among the members of the organization. Michael Fullen and his team of global partners have come together to create new pedagogies for deep learning. And they start with their central focus of being the 6 C's: character, citizenship, collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking. They talk about character as really a proactive stance towards life, where people are learning to learn, grit, tenacity, perseverance, resilience, empathy, compassion, integrity. All of that, of course, is character in action. In terms of citizenship, they look at a global perspective, commitment to human equity, compassion for diverse values and worldviews, interest in human and environmental sustainability, and solving ambiguous and complex problems to benefit the citizens of the world. In collaboration, they talk about working interdependently as a team. They talk about interpersonal and team-related skills, social, emotional, and intercultural skills. In terms of communication, they are really referring to communication designed for audience and impact, delivering messages that advocate a purpose, reflection to develop and improve communication, and really to establish voice to advance humanity. For creativity, they're looking at economic and social entrepreneurialism, asking the right questions, pursuing and expressing novel ideas and solutions. And then, of course, in terms of critical thinking, evaluating information and arguments, making connections, identifying patterns, meaningful knowledge construction, experimenting, reflecting, and taking action on ideas in the real world. If you would take a moment to click on the link at this page, I think you will find an interesting example. Michael Fullan notes that students can become whizzes at technology and accessing information and still not be very smart when it comes to making insightful observations, solid decisions, and taking actions in life. He talks about what we need is not mere knowledge, but deep learning. This model has the 6 C's from the previous slide at the center. They're also guided by a 4-part learning model that talks about partnerships, pedagogical practices, the learning environment, and leveraging the digital. And all of that is supported, of course, by the systems of the school, the region, or the district, and the state. Michael Fullan and his collaborators have spent over 5 years working with 1,200 schools in 8 countries. Their belief is that guided deep learning greatly increases the relevance of school learning. It has the potential to galvanize students into studying and action. It integrates moral purpose, relationships, and detailed learning. It also provides a frame of learning that is good for all students, but is especially good for those who are disaffected by regular schooling. I think it's about time in this presentation for you to meet Michael Fullan. If you click on the link on this slide, it will take you to a very recent interview with Michael Fullan, and it was conducted by Anthony McKay of the Global Ed Talks. You may have figured out by now, change is messy, and it's nonlinear. The question is, how do we integrate moral purpose, understanding the nuances of change, developing relationships, and building deep knowledge? Well, Michael Fullan offers the mechanism of coherence making. And on this slide, you can see a skeletal framework that he has designed about making coherence in education. Focusing direction is essentially about the moral purpose of raising the bar and closing the gap for all students. Remember, that is the mission. Focusing the direction includes, being purpose-driven, having goals that impact, being clear about strategies, and having change leadership. Moral purpose is dynamically related to the collaborative culture. And in a collaborative culture that includes moral purpose, there are joint determinations by leaders and members through focused work. So collaborative culture includes growth, a whole culture of growth, learning, leadership, capacity building, and of course that collaborative work. Deepening learning, as we've learned, is essential for giving coherence and substance, and content is crucial here because deep learning involves clarity of the goals, precision in pedagogy, and shifts in practice through capacity building. And then finally, Fullan's model has securing accountability embedded because then it's important to ensure that it becomes part of the culture. Michael Fullan does not see the coherence framework as discrete steps, though. He compares it to kind of a pulsating heart, and he notes that when all 4 chambers are operating, the organization is healthy. He suggests that quadrants 1 and 2 can be thought of going together. You really can't focus direction without interacting with others. And focusing direction means you need to select a number of small, ambitious goals. He suggests no more than 3. Developing collaborative cultures is hard work, and that involves changing the daily habits of people. And deep learning represents another cultural change, literally. And quadrant 4 is where we talk about making sure we integrate a new culture of accountability. In our current world, the pace of change is ever increasing, and all leaders face a dilemma. If you fail to act when the environment around you is radically changing, it can lead to extinction. On the other hand, making quick decisions under the conditions of mind-racing mania can be equally fatal. So intelligent leaders need to discern when to think and act quickly, as well as when to think and act slowly. When change occurs, there will be challenges. There will be differences of opinion that must be reconciled, and effective leaders need to be prepared to guide people through the differences and make those differences sources of new insights. Working on coherence making is essential in our current world because it's just loaded with uncertainty and confusion. But if we include the processes of pursuing moral purpose, the nuances of the change process, building relationships, and sharing knowledge, it can produce greater coherence as these all unfold. Actually, I'd like to quote now Heifetz and Linsky in a 2017 publication called Leadership on the Line. And they say, for transformative change to be sustainable, it not only has to take root in its own culture, but also has to successfully engage its challenging environment. It must be adaptive to both internal and external realities. Therefore, leadership needs to start by listening and learning, finding out where people are, valuing what is best in what they already know and do, and build from there. So in an effort to bring this all together, to summarize, and of course to extend your learning, I'm going to ask you to view a recently recorded webinar with Michael Fullan. Again, this is a previously recorded webinar, so you will be watching and listening to the presentation and the interactions as they were, I think it's about a month ago. It's part of a series that's offered by the New Pedagogies for Deep Learning, a global partnership, and I do think it will help you to crystallize and pull together some of the major concepts that Michael Fullan really wants to share with you.